Hey there, traveler. Today, we're stepping into a world of crowns, castles, and quiet corridors. I'm about to walk you through the life of someone born not just into privilege, but into the weight of legacy, the son of a king of England. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe for more calm historical storytelling. And before we begin, let me know in the comments, what time is it where you are? And where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's begin. You weren't born into a world of softness. No warm pajamas, no lullabies on the radio, no stroller rides through a sunny park. You were born between cold stone and warm firelight, under banners of your house, to the quiet urgency of whispered prayers and anxious midwives. The walls of the castle echoed, not with joy, but with the heavy silence of expectation. You were the firstborn, the heir. The weight of a crown rested above your crib before you ever opened your eyes. Your mother bled in silence. The chamber was dim and filled with the scent of iron, herbs, and tallow candles. Her attendants murmured prayers not just for her life, but for yours. The women attending her knew the dangers of royal childbirth, how even a healthy baby could cost a queen her breath. Your cries came not with soft weeping, but with a roar that echoed through the stone halls. There was no cheering, only a stillness, like the breath before a storm. Your father wasn't in the room. He never would be. He was elsewhere, riding through mud and fog, already carving your future with the blade he carried. But when news came that you were healthy, breathing, crying, he nodded once and said, "Then we begin." His men cheered softly in the shadows of the great hall, not out of celebration, but acknowledgement. Another piece was placed on the board, a sun, a symbol, a future sealed. You didn't know it, but your life was already divided from others. Where other babies are wrapped in soft cotton and held every hour, you were handed to a wet nurse. She was selected not for warmth, but for strength, discipline, and loyalty, cared for not out of affection, but out of duty. You weren't raised to be loved, you were raised to rule. While other infants were sung lullabies, your room echoed with the chanting of monks nearby and the shuffle of armored boots on stone. While others reached for teddy bears, you were surrounded by emblems, flags, and wooden carvings of beasts. You wouldn't remember your cradle, but it was carved with lions, symbols of courage, authority, and expectation, not for decoration, but as a reminder. You wouldn't remember your first bath, but the water was warmed over fire tended by 3 servants. Your skin was washed, not with scented soap, but with herbs meant to ward off illness and evil spirits. You wouldn't remember your first fever, but a priest stood beside your bed longer than any doctor. Healing was not a science here. It was a matter of God's will. Life and death were not distant fears. They sat in the same room. When your body shook with fever, the whispers outside the door weren't only of healing, they were of inheritance. Your days were ordered before you could speak. The world of childhood as you might imagine it now, playgrounds, birthday cakes, cartoons, none of that existed. Instead, the flicker of torches, the weight of wool garments, the smell of iron and hay. At 3, you were already being taught to sit straight. At 4, you were told never to cry in front of your father's knights. At 5, you were told that your words carry the weight of law. Even your laughter had to be measured. Joy, if it came, was expected to stay quiet. And there was never a moment where you were alone without being watched, not out of care, but caution. You learned to walk not on carpet, but on cold flagstones, your steps echoing through drafty corridors. You learned to speak, not with soft encouragement, but under the watch of stern tutors. Your first words may have been a title, not a name. Your questions weren't about colors or animals, but about symbols on your family's banner, or why some people bowed and others didn't. You didn't color with crayons. You pointed at battle formations on old maps, guided by candlelight. Your fingers learned to trace roads, rivers, borders. The world was already something you were meant to rule. Even in play, your toys were miniatures of power, crowns, scepters, toy swords. Your life, even in its earliest chapters, was a rehearsal. Your nursemaids spoke in hushed voices. Some of them feared you, not for who you were, but for what you might become. Others pitied you. A few grew attached, but they would never say so aloud. Affection was dangerous, attachment risky. Their eyes always turned when your father entered the room. They knew their place, and they knew yours, even before you understood it yourself. And though their touch might have lingered, their steps were always careful, their voices measured, as if one mistake could cost them their station or their heads. Still, you laughed. You took clumsy steps through stone halls, clutching at tapestries, chasing sunbeams across the floor. You mispronounced words, pointed at birds, giggled at flickering candlelight. You were a child, yes, but even your joy had a ceiling. There was always a line you weren't allowed to cross, and someone nearby to remind you where it was. The world smiled at you cautiously, nervously, as if waiting to see what kind of ruler you would become. Even your games were judged. Even your silences were studied. Your father watched you from a distance, not cruelly, but measured. To him, you weren't just a son. You were the future of a dynasty, a blade being slowly sharpened. He wondered whether you would be stronger than him, wiser, or disappoint him. He rarely smiled, but he noticed everything, even how you held your wooden toy sword, even how long you held your breath when angry. He studied you like a general studies a battlefield, and each small victory, each moment you stood tall, each time you clenched your fists instead of crying, was noted. Your mother, when she was well, would sometimes sing to you in a language only she remembered. Her hands smelled of lavender. She touched your cheek with the tenderness of a world you were never allowed to live in. Her moments were fleeting. Her presence, a soft rebellion in a household built on iron. When she told you stories, they were not of dragons slain or lands conquered, but of meadows, of winds on the hill, of a sky unbroken by banners. You learned to love her not with words, but with glances, because love was not a lesson taught aloud. And all this before your 6th birthday. You didn't grow up with television, but with troubadours singing of old battles. You didn't eat cereal in the morning, but thick bread dipped in broth, handed to you by gloved servants. You didn't ask what you wanted to be when you grew up. You already were what you had to become. The world didn't offer you dreams. It offered you duty. It didn't ask what you felt. It demanded what you would become. There were no cartoons to distract you from fear. Fear was your teacher, duty your lullaby. Your childhood wasn't a playground. It was a proving ground. Every stumble was noted, every hesitation corrected. And when you woke crying in the night, There was no comforting embrace, only the cold flicker of a torch in the hallway, and the memory of expectations that never slept. This was your beginning. Not ordinary, not easy, but yours. A beginning marked not by dreams, but by duty. Not by discovery, but by design. You weren't raised to explore the world. You were raised to carry it. And no one asked if you were ready. Readiness was assumed. Perfection expected. Humanity optional. The fire still crackles. The castle still sleeps. And you are still just a boy. Tomorrow, you begin sword lessons. Not pretend, not for play, but to learn how to kill, how to lead, how to stand tall while others fall. You will sweat, bleed, stumble, and rise. You will learn where to strike, how to command, and how to watch your enemies die without looking away. But tonight, you dream of something no one can teach you, of freedom, of gentleness, of who you might have been, of a world where you were simply a child. The sun rises without asking for permission. Light cuts across your chamber, not as invitation, but as command. You are 6, a boy by age, but no longer by treatment. Today, as promised, begins your training. Not just swordplay, but how to hold your body like a promise, how to move like one who owns the space around him. Childhood ends here, quietly, without tears. The walls do not congratulate you. They simply begin to expect more. Your sword is wooden, your hands too small for its grip, but when you hold it, even trembling, no one helps. Helping is for servants, for peasants, for others. You are watched, always watched, and when you stumble, they do not laugh. They nod, because even falling teaches something. You are told the floor is a teacher, the bruises, a tutor, pain, a curriculum. You bleed, and they say, "Good, now you've started." Your teacher is Sir Aldrich. His face is all stone and weather. A man who's bled for your father, and now, he says, will shape you like steel. The sword is not your weapon, he tells you. Discipline is. You do not understand, not yet. But when you hesitate, he makes you stand longer in the rain. When you speak out of turn, he makes you clean every blade in the armory. When you drop your stance, you hold buckets of water until your arms shake. He calls this kindness. When your hands blister, he wraps them tightly, then tells you to continue. Your body aches in ways no child's should. Blisters bloom, muscles tighten. The scent of sweat becomes part of you, and yet you return, day after day, because returning is expected. Complaining is a language you never learned. Each sunrise brings soreness, but also resolve. The soreness becomes familiar, a quiet companion, and over time, the pain changes shape. It becomes pride. At night, your arms tremble so much you can barely lift your spoon, but you never ask for help. Your nursemaid tries once, but you shake your head. You eat in silence, swallowing pain alongside your meal. Even food is no longer comfort. It's fuel. You eat for strength, not for taste. Mealtime is another test, another ritual in becoming something more than human. You watch the knights eat together in a great hall. You notice how your father says nothing, but all make room for his silence. You memorize it. His power is in stillness, not noise. One day, you try it. You sit quietly through your own meal, answering only when spoken to. The servants exchange looks. It's begun. Even in silence, you are performing. And in that stillness, you feel something shift. You begin to understand. Power speaks loudest when it says nothing. Outside of combat, you are taught how to read, not for joy, but for law. You study old scrolls, royal decrees, the history of your line, Latin prayers, Greek philosophy. You recite them aloud, not to learn, but to prove. Knowledge, here is another sword. Your tutor, Brother Theomund, is patient but firm. When your mind wanders, he taps your knuckles, not cruelly, ritually. He smells of ink, old wool, and the dust of many forgotten kings. He believes the written word will shape your crown more than steel. You're introduced to the stables at 7. The horses are taller than you, breathing clouds into the cold morning air. You are told to watch them first, then feed them, then ride. You fall often. You bruise. You rise. There is no sympathy, just instruction. The stablemaster speaks to you as he would a grown man. Respect, here, is earned through repetition, and by 8, you're mounting without hesitation. Your falls become fewer. The bruises fade faster. Sir Aldrich says, a horse is like a kingdom. It throws you when it doubts you. You listen. You learn to mount with dignity, not fear. You ride not for joy, but for control. Eventually you stop falling. Eventually the horse listens. And that is counted as a small, silent victory. You begin to ride in formation, in silence. Your back straight, your eyes forward. You feel the rhythm of the animal beneath you, and for a moment it feels like flight. On your 8th name day, your father gives you a dagger, not ceremonial, real. Its blade is short, but sharp enough to pierce leather. He says only, you'll know when to use it. You don't sleep that night, not from fear, but from wondering what he meant. You take it from its sheath over and over, feeling the weight, the cold promise of metal. It becomes part of your dreams. At night you press it to your palm, not to cut, but to remind yourself what it means to hold power. The world beyond the castle walls begins to open. You're taken to council meetings. You don't speak. You listen. Words about grain, taxes, war, things you barely grasp. But every now and then, you glance at your father's eyes and learn more than any tutor could ever say. You study how he listens, how he nods once and says little. His silences command more than others' speeches. You begin to mirror him. You learn when to speak and when silence will burn deeper. One morning, a man is brought in for stealing. He kneels, pleads. Your father nods once. A hand is taken. You do not look away. The others notice. Your father notices. Later he places a hand on your shoulder. That is all. But that one gesture says more than any lesson. You understand now. Power is quiet, but final. And mercy, though rarely spoken of, is always weighed. You wonder what it costs. At night, you still dream, but the dreams begin to change. Less about birds and sky, more about silence and stone, less about who you might become, and more about who you're expected to be. You begin to dream not of adventure, but of duty, not of escape, but of standing still. The world becomes narrower, but deeper. You begin to carry things that no one sees, expectations, pressure, a throne's long shadow. The castle grows colder, though the fires burn just as bright. The halls stretch longer. Voices echo differently. You speak less. Listen more. Even laughter sounds strange to your ears now. Rare, sharp out of place. You begin to walk slower. Not from fatigue, but from weight. And deep within, A new rhythm begins. The beat of steel on steel. The call of duty, not from without, but within. You begin to rise before the bell. You begin to train before being called. You write your lessons by candlelight, not to impress, but because the silence feels familiar. You spar longer, ride faster, read deeper, not to excel, but because there is no other way to live. You are 9 now. Your hands are steadier. Your voice is lower. You stand straighter. Your gaze holds longer. And when you pass by, the guards no longer smile. They bow. Servants step aside. The baker no longer winks when he sees you. The kitchen boy avoids your eyes. Something has shifted. The castle no longer sees you as a child. It begins to see you as something else. And the boy who once chased shadows across stone now walks with one of his own, the shadow of a king yet to come. It follows you into every room, and sometimes when no one is watching, you try to walk beside it, not behind. And sometimes you wonder if you already are it. You are 10 now. 10. And the days seem shorter, though the tasks stretch longer. The world has weight, measured in steel, in words, in glances. You no longer wonder if you are being tested. You know, every moment is trial. Every silence is judged. You begin to feel it not only in your muscles, but in the pause before every answer, in the stillness before every step. Every breath you take seems to echo through expectations carved long before your birth. The castle watches you with different eyes now. Its stones remember the missteps of other heirs and test your footing accordingly. You rise before the sun. The cold bites your skin before warmth can reach it. You eat alone now. The food is the same, but it tastes of duty. Bread, broth, dried fruit, each mouthful part of a routine, never a delight. Your body has grown lean, strong. The hands once too soft to hold steel now grip it with ease. You carry yourself like your tutors do, shoulders back, chin steady. You do not speak unless addressed. Your childhood voice is gone, replaced by one that echoes against the stone. Even when you're quiet, the air listens. And when you speak, it listens harder. You have become a presence, not just a person. Sir Aldrich's drills have intensified. You fight older boys now. Some are noble, some are seasoned squires. One bloodies your lip, another lands a blow to your ribs. You don't cry, you don't flinch. You wipe it away and return your blade to form. That night, Sir Aldrich nods once. Just once, and it means more than any applause. You've learned that praise is measured here, not in words, but in silence earned, in bruises worn like armor, in sweat that smells of loyalty. Your failures are your curriculum, and your scars are proof of attendance. You begin to take part in small hunts, closely watched, of course. You ride faster, shoot straighter. You learn how to read the wind, track animals, control your breathing before the arrow flies. When you bring down your first deer, the others cheer. You remain still. You kneel beside the body. You touch the still warm fur. You whisper a thank you, unsure why. The circle of life has opened, and you've stepped through. The kill doesn't excite you, it humbles you. You begin to understand death, not as punishment, but as a balance, a cost. And with each hunt, you begin to understand what it means to take responsibility for life, and the ending of it. Inside the castle, the tone shifts. You attend longer councils. You are asked what you think. Small things at first. What punishment fits a poacher? Should a tax be raised or delayed? You speak slowly, carefully. Every answer feels like a stone laid in the foundation of something immense. The older men watch you more attentively now. Some smile behind their eyes. Others seem wary. You're beginning to matter. And with mattering comes scrutiny. Your words don't vanish when spoken. They ripple. You begin to notice which men nod and which cross their arms. You're not just speaking, you're being heard. At 11, you begin shadowing your father more directly. You ride beside him through the countryside. You watch how he holds the reins, firm, but never tight. You watch how he listens to complaints from farmers and barons alike. He rarely smiles, but when he does, it's for effect. And you study that too. You begin to mimic the way he listens, the pauses he allows before answering. You understand that power isn't in knowing everything. It's in knowing when to speak, when to wait, when silence becomes an answer. On those rides, you learn that a crown weighs less on the head than on the heart. You are taught languages now. French for diplomacy, Latin for religion. You begin to understand the scriptures, not as faith, but as law, as politics. You learn to read the lines between the words and the meaning beneath the prayers. Brother Theomund grows stricter. He lets you read alone in the chapel by candlelight. You do, even when your eyes blur, even when your back aches. You find strange comfort in the silence of parchment. The candlelight flickers over stone and text, casting long shadows across your future. The words whisper to you, not comfort, but purpose. Each verse, each passage, feels less like devotion and more like inheritance. That year, your younger brother is born. You meet him only twice in the first month. The wet nurse carries him in, and you're told to look. He is pink, sleeping. He does not yet carry weight, but you see it, waiting in the air above his crib. And in your chest, something shifts, not jealousy, not joy, just awareness. You are no longer only the child. You are now the example. You begin to watch your own behavior more closely. You begin to walk taller, speak clearer, not for yourself, but for him. Someday, he will learn by watching you, and someday, he may follow or challenge. You begin to wonder if your future is truly yours, or a placeholder for his. You begin training in heraldry, in law, in the reading of contracts. You are taught how to recognize lies, how to weigh alliances. Your lessons stretch into evenings. You no longer long for games. You no longer recall the taste of idle time. While others play, you learn to analyze. You read letters from lords, assess the tone, guess their intentions. You learn the power of words unsaid. You begin to dream in scrolls and signatures, in seals pressed onto wax. You understand that kingdoms are ruled as much by ink as by iron, that the shape of your name on a page may one day build, or break, a nation. At 12, your first command is tested. A squadron of young squires fails a morning drill. Sir Aldrich turns to you and asks, "What would you do?" You hesitate, then speak. "A light punishment." A correction. Aldrich nods again. The squires obey you. They do not call you boy again. Later, you overhear one say, "He's not like us." You don't know whether it's pride or sadness that follows. Leadership, you realize, is a kind of loneliness, a place above and apart. And once you've stepped onto that place, you cannot step back down. At 13, your strength is noticed. You duel with a full-grown knight. It is for show, but neither of you treats it lightly. Steel meets steel. Sweat stings your eyes. Your arms ache. You lose, but barely. And afterward, the night clasps your shoulder and says, almost. And then quieter, soon. The fight lingers with you, not in pain, but in promise. You are nearly something, and nearly is no longer enough. You return to your chambers with your chest tight, not from the loss, but from what you almost were. You look at your reflection in the silver basin. You see the beginnings of someone else, someone heavier, someone who will be asked to carry more than his years. You straighten your back without thinking, and for the first time, you do not look away. That night you are summoned to your father's study. The fire is low. He offers you wine, just a sip. You sit in silence until he says, "You are becoming what you must." You say nothing, but something inside you answers. A quiet yes, a silent oath. A seed that takes root deep inside and begins to grow thorns. That night your dreams are not dreams. They are rehearsals. You sleep with the dagger beside you now, not because of fear, but familiarity. You dream not of kings, but of decisions, of walls closing in and holding firm, of names that will one day be written in ink or in blood, of hands you'll need to shake and hands you'll need to raise. Your dreams are no longer of fantasy, they are of inevitability. You wake not rested, but sharpened, and your mornings begin not with questions, but with readiness. You are no longer a shadow. You are the figure beginning to cast one, a shape that others notice, a future that others feel. And though you are still growing, still learning, still stumbling, you have stepped into the frame of something larger, something that will not bend. And you begin to understand. You are not being shaped into a king. You are being shaped into a story, one that others will tell, one that some will follow, and one that perhaps you will never truly own, and one that may one day outlive even your name. You are 14 now. The air around you has changed. It no longer feels like something you move through. It moves around you. Men no longer correct your stance. They match it. When you speak, advisors lean closer, not out of politeness, but consideration. There's a weight in your voice now, not just from age, but from the things you've learned not to say. Your body moves like it remembers pain and expects more. You no longer train to become, you train because you are. Every bruise has become a map, every scar a signature. Your body no longer grows in innocence, it grows in anticipation. Even the walls of the castle seem quieter when you walk. The laughter of servants softens. The maids glance without giggling. The stewards give space. You are still a youth, but one wrapped in silence and shadow. You have become someone others prepare themselves to greet. Pages stop fidgeting. Knights bow slightly lower. There is a hush that follows you, not out of fear, but expectation. Even your steps seem louder now, not in sound, but in presence. The echoes of your footsteps linger like declarations. The first real battle does not wait for a perfect moment. War never does. A border skirmish flares into something larger. You are summoned, not as a witness, but as part of the retinue. You ride not beside your father, but just behind. The saddle beneath you is real leather, worn from past campaigns. The sword at your hip is real steel, heavier than it felt during practice. And the men you pass bow not only to your father, but to you. Not with joy, but with acknowledgement. You are no longer theory. You are part of the machine. You no longer wonder what you will be. You wonder what you are already becoming. The road beneath you groans as if aware of your passage. The wind tugs at your cloak like it knows the gravity of what's to come. The night before the clash, you do not sleep. You walk the campfires alone, your cloak drawn tight, watching the flickering eyes of soldiers. They do not jest or drink, not like in the stories. They sharpen their blades in silence. They murmur prayers. You pass them, and they glance upward, not to see you, but to assess you. One nods. Another taps his chest. You nod back. It's the only language anyone trusts tonight. And in the dark, with smoke in your nose and frost on your breath, you feel older than your years. The stars above seem different tonight, more watchful, less distant. You wonder if one of them has already marked your name. You think of your father, somewhere on the far end of camp, seated over maps and strategies. You think of Sir Aldrich, probably sharpening steel or memories. And you think of your younger brother, asleep in the castle, safe for now. You press your hand against your dagger, not for use, but for grounding. Your fingers wrap around the hilt, not as a gesture of readiness, but of necessity. You breathe as if every exhale is a countdown. You wonder, not with fear, but with a strange calm, what kind of man you will become by sunrise. Dawn comes, and with it, your first battle. It is not like the drills. There is no rhythm, no choreography, only sound, metal on metal, men crying out, hooves tearing into earth. You are told to hold the flank. You do, until your arms burn, until your lungs scream, until a man rushes you with murder in his eyes, and you do not hesitate. Your sword finds him. He falls. Your first. His blood is on your blade, and later on your hands. The cut is clean, but the memory will not be. You feel the jolt of your own mortality. You feel the silence that follows the act. And then comes the realization, nothing will ever be as it was. You cannot unswing the blade. You cannot unlive this moment. There is no time to feel, only to fight, only to survive, only to win. And you do. The enemy flees. Your side holds. And when the horns sound and the dust settles, you are still standing, shaking, bloodied, breathless, but standing. You are congratulated, clapped on the back, acknowledged. You are praised, but you cannot feel pride, only stillness. The victory tastes of metal, like a coin held on the tongue too long. No cheers reach your bones, only the quiet ache of what has changed. That night, you do not eat. You sit by the fire, staring into the orange and gold, hands open, silent. Sir Aldrich sits beside you. He says nothing for a long time. Then, finally, you did what needed to be done. You nod. You do not speak. Your mouth is full of ash and memory. The crackling of the fire sounds like marching feet. The heat on your face is no comfort. It feels like confession. You stare into the flame and realize that even fire, which devours without judgment, leaves behind blackened remnants. You are now one of them. You ride home changed. Your mother sees it. She reaches for your hand and pauses, not out of fear, but reverence. Your younger brother stares at you longer now, as if trying to decipher the new shape you've taken. He doesn't ask questions, but he stops playing with toy swords. Your presence reshapes the household. The servants whisper more softly. Even the dog that once chased your boots now waits for permission to approach. The halls no longer echo the same. You have become a silence others listen to. You begin participating in more councils. Your father lets you speak first. Your opinions are sharper now. You question more, hesitate less. You are no longer a student. You are a factor. The chamber no longer swallows your voice. It waits for it. You see men turn toward you instinctively. Your seat becomes heavier. Your words are not suggestions. They are positions, measured, noted. Your voice joins the architecture of command. At 15, you oversee your first judgment, a land dispute between two vassals. You listen to both, ask questions, then decide. One man bows, the other grits his teeth, but obeys. That evening your father tells you, "Not every good decision will be loved, remember that." You do. You carry the weight of that day into the next, and the next, and the ones after. The decision echoes through letters, through reactions, through changed loyalties. You realize rulership is not a moment, it's a ripple. And every word you speak now sends one outward. Your voice is no longer just yours. It belongs to time. Your training continues, but it no longer shapes you. It tempers you. You are not learning to be a warrior. You are learning to carry what warriors break. You study injuries now, not to heal, but to understand. You watch men come back broken, and you learn where the mind fractures even when the bone does not. You ask about battlefield decisions. You ask what it means to leave a man behind. You start asking the kinds of questions no one answers quickly. You begin to understand that leadership is not built on victories, but on what they cost. And then comes your first funeral, a knight you trained beside, killed in a skirmish. You stand by the pyre. You do not cry, but you watch the flame devour the past, and you feel the silence settle into your spine. His family weeps nearby. You do not interrupt. You only nod when they glance at you. The son of the king, now a son of fire. The smoke feels personal. The loss feels familiar. You cannot mourn as a friend. You mourn as a leader. You nod once to his brother, once to the widow, then turn away. Not out of coldness, but ritual. Your tears are not welcome, not here, not yet. You are 16 now, and when you ride through the courtyard, children stop playing, servants bow faster. The world leans differently around you. You are no longer becoming. You are. And the boy who once dreamed of swords and scrolls now dreams only of steadiness, of making it through tomorrow with honor, of choosing mercy when possible and strength when necessary. You begin to write your own letters. You begin to draft your own treaties. Your name, for the first time, appears beneath a seal. Your words are quoted, your suggestions enacted. The ink on the page carries more than thought. It carries implication. You meet with emissaries. You translate nuances. You observe, always, how power is carried by posture. You begin to recognize ambition in voices. You sense when someone is lying, even if only to themselves. You begin to see the crown not as an object, but as a shadow that touches everything. Even your reflection seems to hold it, faint and flickering, but there. Because you have learned something they don't write in the scrolls. A crown is not worn on the head. It is carried in your silence, in the blood on your hands, in the nights you do not sleep, in the words you almost say, but don't, in the moments you want to run, and stay. In the glances you exchange across battle lines and banquet halls, in the cost of your restraint. In the scars you hide beneath silk. In the memories you carry like armor no one sees. In the burdens you don't share. In the questions you never ask aloud. In the patience that feels like agony. In the truths you discover but never voice. And you carry it well, because you must. And somewhere in your mind, the boy you once were still stands in the cold hall of childhood, watching the man you've become ride out into a future no one can promise. But he does not weep. He salutes, and then he fades. You are older now. The sharp edges of youth have softened into something quieter, heavier. You no longer run through the halls. You walk, slowly, purposefully. There's a weight to your name now, and you can feel it in every room you enter. People bow lower, speak more carefully, wait longer before laughing. Not out of fear, but because they're trying to read the shape of your thoughts. You're no longer the boy with a future. You are the future, standing upright, breathing, listening. The air around you feels denser, as if every glance is a prediction, every silence a test. And somewhere, in the quiet moments between councils and sword drills, you begin to see it, the shape of the world, the way it bends, not to truth, but to power. You see that strength is not always in the sword swing or the thunder of a horse's gallop, but in the silence that follows your command. In the way two barons argue, but glance at you for the verdict. In the pause before your father speaks, waiting for your nod. Power, you learn, is rarely loud. It is most dangerous when it's quiet. It hums beneath the surface, like a storm gathering far beyond the horizon. You start to notice how many things men do just to be seen. How much of life is performance. You see knights posture for attention, nobles flatter without honesty, servants offer smiles that vanish when backs are turned. You begin to understand why your father's eyes are always tired, why he watches more than he speaks, why he lets silence do most of the work. You see now how much wisdom lies in stillness, in not being the first to speak, but the last to decide. You start to emulate it, begin to measure your words like coin, your glances like arrows. And in this shift, you feel your own thoughts changing. You begin to question everything you were once sure of. Is honor truly a shield, or just a word men hide behind? Is courage the roar on the battlefield, or the quiet refusal to give up in a council chamber? You look at the sword on your hip and realize it's not just for battle. It's a symbol, a threat, a reassurance, a burden. And the crown you once imagined as glory now seems to cast a shadow even when not worn. Its outline haunts your dreams, a promise and a warning all at once. You think often now of your first kill, not with guilt, but with clarity. That moment, once so loud in your memory, has become quieter, not forgotten, but folded, part of you, like a scar beneath silk. And with it comes a deeper awareness of cost, not just the blood spilled, but the breath held, the dreams interrupted, the futures erased. That man had a name, a family, a place in his world, and with one swing, all of it was erased. You do not regret it, but you do not forget. Each battle since has only thickened the silence in your mind, that weight pressing just behind your eyes. You begin to realize that most men don't care for justice. They care for favor, for outcome, for safety, even if it's built on silence and compromise. You see it in their eyes, in the way they say one thing but mean another, and you begin to understand why kings grow cold, not from cruelty, but from the erosion of faith. Faith in men, in motives, in peace. Every promise begins with hope and dies beneath politics, and you wonder if your future holds anything untouched by that decay. And yet, you do not grow bitter. You grow careful. You start to move slower through rooms, watching, absorbing, measuring every glance and every silence. Because you know now that betrayal comes dressed in friendship, and false loyalty often wears the loudest smile. You replay conversations in your mind hours later, dissecting intent like a surgeon at work. You trust, but never without caution. You listen, but rarely answer fully. Because now, when you see a farmer kneel before you, you wonder what he truly wants. When a knight offers loyalty, you wonder to whom he speaks when you're not in the room. When your brother smiles, you wonder what burdens you're shielding him from, and how long you'll be able to keep it that way. Even your own reflection seems more foreign now, the face of a youth fading beneath the weight of expectation. You stare at yourself longer now, studying the eyes, the brow, the curve of the mouth, asking, who are you becoming? You reflect on your childhood, the laughter, the games, the easy days when your biggest worry was which boots to wear or whether your tutor would notice your inattention. And you realize it was not weakness, it was peace. And peace is not the absence of war. It's the absence of fear, a luxury you no longer afford, even in dreams. The world you now inhabit does not allow for dreams, only calculation. You understand now why your father kept so much from you, why the scrolls were always half written, why the maps were never left unattended. You see that leadership is not control, it's endurance. It's bearing witness to the worst of men and still choosing not to become one. It's realizing that sometimes the best decision is the loneliest one, and that a ruler's heart often breaks in private. Sometimes strength is simply the refusal to let despair in. Sometimes you watch the children in the courtyard, running, shouting, laughing, and a part of you aches, not for what you've lost, but for what they don't yet know. You want to tell them, to warn them, but you don't. Because every crown begins in innocence, and every ruler must pass through fire on their own. If they are lucky, they emerge. If not, the crown burns them from the inside out. And even if you could save them, would it be mercy or theft? You think about modern children sometimes. Soft sheets, warm baths, words of affirmation, gentle bedtimes, and toys that do not wound. You wonder what kind of man you might have become in such a world, whether the softness would have saved you or unmade you. Would compassion have bloomed in you more easily, or would it have dulled your edge, made you unfit for a throne soaked in duty? Would a gentler world have left you strong, or simply untested? But you are not of that world. You are of this one, where steel sings louder than lullabies, where the weight of your footsteps matters more than the warmth of your smile, where you are not raised to be kind, but to be ready, ready to defend, to sacrifice, to endure what others cannot bear. And as you watch the sun set from your tower, you do not wish for another life. You prepare for what this one demands, and what it will one day take from you. And you are. ready not just for battle, but for burden, for decisions that leave no one cheering, for days where silence is your only companion, for nights where your only comfort is knowing you did not flinch, ready to bury the boy you were and become the man the realm will one day follow, not because you desire it, but because it must be done. You are older now, and the world has revealed itself not as a tapestry of truth, but a battlefield of perception. And in this war of shadows and smiles, you do not seek victory. You seek clarity and purpose and peace, not for yourself, but for the realm, for your people, for the generations who will inherit what you leave behind. Because only the clear can lead, only the steady survive, and only the willing bear the crown without letting it destroy them. You saw it coming long before a word was said. It wasn't a formal declaration, nor a fiery speech from the throne. No, it was quieter than that, like an illness you feel before symptoms emerge. The air in the court changed. Advisors grew terse. The war maps never left the council table. Your father's hands trembled slightly when he thought no one looked. His gaze turned iron. He paced more, slept less, gripped his goblet like it might escape. You knew the signs. The campaign was forming, and this time something deep in you said, "We shouldn't." But saying nothing had long become a habit. You had been groomed to read the language of empire, how pain echoes in policy, how fear dresses up as duty, and all signs pointed not to an uprising, but to a cry for help. The northern provinces had no armies, only hunger. Letters arrived bearing tales of fields turned to mud, of livestock stolen by winter, of children growing thin beneath threadbare cloaks. It wasn't treason they offered. It was proof that the crown had failed them. But where you saw warning, your father saw defiance. Where you saw frost, he saw fire. He spoke of rot and rebellion, of honor, of precedent. He spoke of legacy again and again, as if trying to convince himself more than anyone else. He summoned the generals, redrew the borders of justice with black ink and red wax. The circle drawn around the valley was not a mark of defense, but of punishment. "We must remind them," he said. And you knew, even then, this wasn't a correction. It was a reckoning. Your objections were silent, as always. Even now, you wonder what might have changed if you'd spoken. But training runs deep, and princes, like blades, are forged for function, not feeling. You were raised to act, not question, to represent the crown, not challenge it. You rode out beneath a sky that didn't know what to be, blue or gray, storm or peace. You wore the crown's colors, polished to gleam, and the people cheered as you passed, not knowing they sent you to slaughter ghosts. The march to the valley was long and haunted by the hush of anticipation. At night, you watched the soldiers joke by the fire, polishing blades meant for beggars, not enemies. You wanted to stop them, but instead you nodded, because that's what you were raised to do, because doubting orders, even in the silence of your heart, was a betrayal too deep to voice aloud. And besides, what could one voice change? The battle did not unfold like the legends say. There were no drums, no gallant charges, only mud and blood and breath turning white in the morning cold. The valley turned to mire within minutes. Boots vanished into sludge. Horses screamed and threw riders into the chaos. Arrows were loosed not with ceremony but in frenzy. You didn't command the charge. You were consumed by it. When your banner crested the hill, the men surged forward, shouting your name. You became their storm, their symbol, their myth, even as your heart buckled beneath the weight of it. They say your sword was the first to draw blood. They say your voice rang out like thunder, but truth is murkier. You swung because the man in front of you did. You shouted because silence would have betrayed you. And when you met eyes with the first soldier you struck down, you saw not defiance, but fear, a reflection of your own. His hands trembled, much like yours, his breath catching in his throat, and in that instant, the illusion of enemy fractured. He looked like your cousin, like the baker's son, like anyone, like everyone. There was a moment, small but eternal, when time fractured. A young boy, no older than your page, stood before you with nothing but a rake. You could have spared him. You wanted to. But the battle roared around you, and you were no longer just a man. You were momentum. You were inevitability. The rake broke beneath your strike. The boy did not scream, and in your dreams, he never does. In your waking hours, his eyes follow you through the halls of memory. His silence is a ghost stitched to your name. By midday, your armor had dulled with grime and blood. You could barely lift your arms, yet you pressed on, not from valor, but from necessity. Around you, men looked for you like a compass. When you faltered, they steadied. When you charged, they followed. You didn't feel strong. You felt hollow. But the myth needed movement, and so you moved. You became a lighthouse in the fog, drawing their eyes, their hope, even as you drowned inside. Your voice cracked. Your breath turned to glass. But you did not stop. You couldn't. You were the rhythm that held the army together. The name they whispered as a promise they clung to. The enemy broke by dusk, not because they were overpowered, but because they were overwhelmed. Not by numbers, but by belief. Your belief. Or rather, the belief projected upon you. When you raised your sword, they saw not a prince, but prophecy. When you took the hill, they didn't run from death. They ran from the story they knew they couldn't win. And the tale would be retold, growing sharper, cleaner, more heroic with each telling. The poets would not write of mud, or fear, or trembling hands. They would write of your eyes blazing with destiny. Back home the tale arrived before you did. Bards penned songs as the wounded still moaned on the field. Artists painted you with halos of fire. They called you the Storm Prince, the Iron Sun, the shield born of storms. You hadn't even washed the blood from your hands before a tapestry of your heroism hung in the great hall. The thread still smelled of dye when the court declared your name holy. You walked beneath it, a man among myths, your heart beating louder than the hymns. Children repeated your name like prayer. Nobles nodded as if your ascent had always been inevitable. At the victory feast, your father stood beside you. He didn't smile, didn't speak, but his hand on your shoulder felt heavier than any armor. And in that single gesture, you understood. He saw you now, not as a boy, not even as his son, but as his mirror, his reflection cast in newer, sharper steel. You had passed the test, and the silence between you both was not cold. It was ceremonial. The court rejoiced. Goblets clinked. Poets praised your name. But you? You sat still. The room spun around you in gold and crimson, but you saw only the valley, the faces, the rake, the boy. That night, alone in your chambers, you stared into the candlelight. The reflection in the steel no longer looked like you. You whispered no prayers. You asked no questions, because you already knew the answers, and those answers carried the weight of silence, of cost, of choices that could never be undone. The crown was closer now. You could feel it in your spine, in your breath, not as reward, but as gravity. You had become legend, a living myth. And myths don't sleep. Myths don't mourn. Myths ride into battle when ordered, and never ask why. They wear masks so often they forget the face beneath. And you, now, had no time for remembrance. Only rehearsals for coronation. You had obeyed. You had won. But you had also crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. You now knew what all kings must know, that leadership is not built on rightness, but on ritual, that history is a play where the actors bleed for real, and the applause drowns out the dying. That victory tastes like ash when earned through echoes, that to be worshipped is to be alone. In the silence that followed, you understood. The world would never see you the same again, and perhaps neither would you. You were no longer walking toward the crown. It was already on your shadow, and the weight of it was already reshaping your spine. The battlefield faded, but its weight lingered, not only in your bones, sore and bruised from the rawness of victory, but in the glances cast your way. Glances no longer filled with casual warmth or shared camaraderie, but something else entirely. Reverence, expectation, hesitation, silence. The kind of silence that thickens the air and makes even the clink of armor feel like thunder. You had returned not as a boy, but as a symbol, not simply bloodied, but anointed in myth. You were now sewn into the seams of tapestries, spoken of in corners of great halls, and remembered more in story than in presence. With every nod, every deferential bow, came a new and deeper realization. Your father, the king, would not last forever. And so began the quiet transition, not of power, but of perception. You noticed more what wasn't said. The empty chair at the end of the council table, the cough behind closed doors that lingered too long, the armor of your father that hadn't moved from its stand in weeks, gathering dust like memory. His voice still commanded, but softer now, weighed down by something unseen. He still ruled, but from shadows. He signed documents, but the urgency was gone. His gaze, once sharp and unrelenting, now searched the floor, and in those silent spaces, the eyes of the court turned to you. You began to speak, not to ask, but to decide, and no one questioned why. Even the court jesters told jokes more carefully, their glances always flicking to you. There was no ceremony, no crown passed hand to hand. And yet, everyone knew. It was in the way servants snapped upright when you entered a room, in the sidelong glances of the guards, measuring your mood, in the way even the queen shifted slightly towards you at dinners. And your father, he no longer corrected you in front of others. He listened, as though searching for an echo of himself in your choices. You had become king in everything but name, and it was already too late to turn back. Even visiting nobles brought gifts addressed with your crest embroidered, not as heir, but as ruler in waiting. At first, the responsibilities came in harmless shapes. Would you maintain the levy on river merchants? What were your thoughts on grain tariffs in the north? Would you sit for talks with the ambassadors from the east? Questions, yes, but in them, a test, a probe. Who would you become when the final crown fell on your head? Would you rule with iron and certainty, or would you reach for softer tools, diplomacy, empathy, patience? And would those tools hold? Even your childhood companions looked at you differently now, uncertain whether to call you by name or by title. You retreated, not out of fear, but to think. The stables became your sanctuary again, the archives, your chapel. You dug into forgotten treaties, dusty with age. You read proclamations from kings who ruled 100 years before your name was even whispered. You scrawled notes in margins, searching not for answers but patterns. And in that dust, a strange sort of kinship grew. You were not the first boy to carry a kingdom on his back before his beard was full, but even knowing that, the road ahead was no less lonely. You found yourself memorizing not just facts, but human patterns, how grief changed policy, how pride shaped war, how silence dictated loyalty. Even love, once a simple comfort, became a political calculation. Your sleep changed. It was no longer rest. It was calculation. You would wake in the middle of the night, remembering the phrasing of an envoy's compliment, wondering if it had been a subtle threat. You began to understand the long silences of your father, why he prayed alone, why his wine was never sweet, why he stared out the window with a look not of nostalgia, but of measurement. The throne was not a seat, it was a crucible, and it did not accept weakness. It did not forgive hesitation. It reshaped your posture, your breath, even your dreams. Sometimes you awoke feeling more metal than flesh, and as the days passed, you started to lose the clear memory of who you were before the weight began to press. So you prepared. You trained harder, but quieter. You asked questions in public, but kept your convictions private. You began to build alliances, not just in the open court, but in whispered corners, in shared meals with minor lords, in acknowledgments of the small things that made men loyal. You studied not only war, but want, not only power, but hunger. Because you began to understand that being king was not about giving orders. It was about understanding why people obeyed them. Power was not enforced. It was cultivated like a crop, season by season. And one bad harvest could bring ruin. The more you studied, the more clearly you saw the delicate balance between justice and brutality, vision and tradition, hope and fear. The waiting became its own battle. Each day your father lived was a blessing, but also a countdown. The ink on the succession scroll remained dry, but your name was already spoken in the language of authority. You began to move differently, your steps slower, your eyes sharper. You smiled when it mattered, and never when it didn't. Every laugh had weight, every silence had meaning. You were learning how to breathe in a room full of knives. And the rooms multiplied, meetings with generals, secretive exchanges with merchants, quiet observations of guild leaders. Each interaction, a chess move in a game that never ended. You realized that your future battles would be fought not only with steel, but with glances, with promises, with restraint. And when you looked in the mirror now, you saw less of the boy who once stared in awe at his father's crown, and more of the man who would one day bear it, not as ornament, but as burden, not as prize, but as sentence. Because the crown, you now understood, does not descend with ceremony. It coils around you slowly, invisibly, day by day, until it is not worn. It is woven into your flesh, until your thoughts are no longer your own, but threads in a much older tapestry, and you carry it, not because you want to, but because the world has already decided you will, and its decision is louder than your desire. It is written in the scrolls, in the prayers of the people, in the architecture of your very life. You are no longer merely the son of a king. You are the future against which the past measures itself. And so, even before the crown touched your brow, you had already bowed beneath its weight. And then, one morning, the world changed, quietly. There were no horns, no crows taking flight, no trembling earth or crashing waves, just the stillness that follows the breath of history, that hush in the air just before a new chapter of fate unfolds. You were called early, before the sun had risen, by a servant too pale to meet your gaze. No words were needed. The message lived in his silence, heavy as iron. You dressed not in armor, but in black, the fabric colder than you remembered, like the shadows of the great halls had climbed into the folds. The corridors, once bustling with warmth and firelight, now felt like the insides of a tomb. Or perhaps it was simply that the fire had gone out, first in him, and now in this place. Your father lay still, not weakened, not slumbering, but gone in the only way that could never be reversed. A stillness so complete it seemed to swallow even the flickering candlelight beside his bed. His hands, once calloused and commanding, now rested useless atop his chest, and his crown sat on a cushion nearby, silent, waiting, watching. Somehow you did not cry, not yet. Grief would come later, carefully folded into rituals, buried under titles and proclamations, disguised behind posture and duty. For now, your body moved on instinct, precise, rehearsed, numb. You stood where he once stood, and felt the architecture of power begin to press against your shoulders. The tapestries seemed to watch. The stone beneath your feet seemed to listen. 100 expectations, all silent, all waiting. The echoes of your own footsteps sounded different now, more final, more resounding. The council gathered. Advisors who had known you since your first stumble now looked at you not as the boy they once taught to write, but as a blade unsheathed. The coronation had not yet taken place, but they already bent knees. Not out of love, perhaps not even loyalty, but necessity, stability, continuity. The realm needed a king, and you were no longer allowed to hesitate. Doubt had no place at this table. Childhood had been revoked by silence and sealed tombs. Your name, once spoken casually, now carried the weight of law. There were rites, incense, holy oils that smelled of myrrh and pine, soaked into your scalp like ancestral memories. Chants in ancient tongues echoed through the stonework of the cathedral like the voices of kings long buried. Bells tolled not in joy, but in inevitability, their vibrations trembling in your ribs. The crown was brought out, not gleaming, but heavy, dulled by centuries of burden and the sweat of every brow that had worn it before. You knelt. You felt the cold touch of metal as it descended, not like a gift, but like a seal. A closing, a transformation. You were not being honored. You were being claimed by the weight of a kingdom. A mantle passed down in silence, through blood, through sorrow. And when you rose, nothing felt different, and yet everything had changed. Even the air tasted different. The silence now obeyed you. The faces around you shifted, masks slipping into expressions of calculation, reverence, and veiled ambition. The next weeks were a blur of signatures and feasts, of formal smiles and forged alliances. Decrees were issued bearing your name, your handwriting still carrying the uncertain tremble of youth trying to mask the certainty of command. Ambassadors arrived with guarded praise and long glances, calculating your every word and movement. Dissenters vanished before they could gather mass. Rumors shifted tone, and your name entered them with a different cadence. You sat through judgments with a voice steady and eyes distant. Your friends, those who had once raced horses through the orchards, now addressed you as Your Majesty. Their laughter faded, replaced by silence and carefully measured words. No one touched your shoulder anymore. No one leaned in close. You were surrounded, yet alone, worshipped, yet untouched. Every meal now felt like a performance. Every word weighed before it left your lips. But even in that solitude, there was purpose. You remembered the lessons, the ancient scrolls, your father's silences, the trembling hands of peasants who offered tribute, the calls of shepherds from the hills who knew no court etiquette but understood the turning of seasons. You ruled not with fear but with precision. You sought truth not in declarations but in patterns. You did not swing your sword needlessly. But when you did, it was remembered. Your justice became a story in itself, carried on the backs of travelers, whispered in market stalls, repeated around hearths and candlelit taverns. You did not demand respect. It arrived unspoken, built from the careful weaving of action and restraint. Children now recited your name in temples. Sculptors shaped your face into marble and bronze. Ballads were composed before your deeds were even complete. Your victories outpaced the ink of the scribes. And still, at night, you returned to the same narrow window where you once watched your father in silence, wondering what burden made his shoulders slump, wondering if he had once felt the same thrill, the same nausea, the same trembling resolve. Now you knew. Now it was your weight to carry, and still you stood tall, because this was no longer a story of a prince becoming king. It was a story of a boy who had watched the world and chose not only to inherit it, but to shape it. You were no longer walking someone else's path. You were carving your own, stone by stone, choice by choice. Your hands, once too small for the hilt, now held the reins of nations, and in that grip the future trembled, because it knew it had been claimed by someone who had seen its shadows. And if the stone beneath your feet ever forgot your name, the sky above would remember. The wind would whisper it across valleys. The stars would blink it in silver, and long after your bones returned to dust, they would say, "He was not born a king, he became one."